to have Dick Storm. And Dick is an energy policy advocate, the founder of Storm Technologies, and he has spent over 50 years in the energy industry. He's going to talk today on his thoughts about energy policy and the direction of the United States, and then we'll see where it goes from there. It's not every day we get somebody with this much experience on the show. So I think we're going to get to go back and get a look at the past and a look, hopefully, into the future. Welcome to the podcast, Dick.
Peter, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm honored to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you. And I introduced you as an energy policy advocate. So tell us what that looks like in your life today.
Well, I've been in the business a long time, and I was a coal power specialist, and I've worked all around the world in coal-fired power plants. And I would come home when I was working and go to a PTA meeting or a cocktail meeting in a social setting, and people would say, "What do you do?" And I tell them what I do. I tune coal pulverizers and coal-fired power plants, and they get the glazed look in their eye and really not understand what I did. And so then we talk about boating or kids or schools, whatever. So anyway, I got to New Source Review situations in the 90s when Bill Clinton was president. And my job as a combustion expert, as an energy engineer, was to make changes to coal-fired power plants to make them more efficient, to make them cleaner, to make them run more reliably. And what I discovered was the company I was working for, did some things to make coal pulverizers run better, at better efficiency, better fineness, lower NOx, and things like that. And the company that I was working for got nailed for violating New Source Review because they had improved an old coal-fired boiler. And anyway, that went on, and I thought it was absurd. But anyway, it's still a fact, and New Source Review is still a problem. And I thought that was crazy. Well, I couldn't say anything about it, couldn't do anything about it because I was working in the industry. And that's how I became what you call an energy advocate when I sold the company to my son. And Danny runs Storm Technologies now, and all the things that I say are just strictly as a frustrated senior engineer that worked in the power industry for 50 or 60 years. And I know a lot about power. And what I saw in policies was just absolutely nuts. It started with New Source Review. And then it gets into the people that are in power are carbon hater extremists from the Sierra Club, from the Natural Resources Defense Council, from the Environmental Defense Fund, and organizations like that. And organizations like the Sierra Club have billions, well, hundreds of millions of dollars anyway, probably billions, that fight coal, and they brag about shutting down coal plants. They brag about shutting down nuclear plants. And those people, like Gina McCarthy and Joe Gothman and John Kerry, I don't think worked for NRDC, but Gina McCarthy did. And when she left the Obama administration, she went to work for the Natural Resources Defense Council, and the 990 form said she made $855,000 a year. Then Biden gets into office, and she ends up being the climate czar, or one of them. So anyway, the policies that have shut down 102,000 megawatts of reliable, dispatchable coal and nuclear plants since 2010 are extremists that hate the industry that I worked in for many years, for 5 decades. And I resent it. And it's bad for America, and it's weakening America. In fact, I saw Alex Epstein talking about how we're in a decline. America's in a decline because of the grid weakening. And yes, it is, because they're shutting down power plants like crazy with no plan to make an orderly transition. I could be for I started my career actually working in Babcock and Wilcox in Ohio on the Oconee nuclear plant, which is still in operation. One of the plants here in South Carolina that keeps the lights on. It started up in 1973, and there's 3 units there. But anyway, Robinson plant up near Florence started in 1970. It's a Westinghouse nuclear plant. Well, nobody talks about those plants, and there hasn't been. Well, we tried to build Santee Cooper and South Carolina Electric and Gas. We're going to build a new summer unit 2 and 3 here, two 1100 megawatt Westinghouse units, but they went bankrupt, or they did go bankrupt. They mismanaged it, probably because of the supply chain of craftsmen and engineers wasn't there to adequately support the plant. Vogel is a similar unit over in Georgia, and they're going to get theirs built. But anyway, meanwhile, coal plant, another 20% of our coal capacity is planned to get shut down at the end of this year. And it probably will happen because of extreme EPA rules that are just unreasonable. And anyway, as we lose these dispatchable, affordable power plants, there's no way to make up for the lost generation with solar or wind. And I find that absurd. So that's why I'm speaking out, and that's my main beef with energy policy. No energy policy in America.
Gotcha. Well, Dick, so I appreciate your perspective, and I started my career in the power industry as well, and so certainly understand the value of dispatchable power and understand what it means. Um, and I think we have to, we have to look at the other side, right? So otherwise, it just gets a little boring if I give you sort of tee up questions. But what I would say is that advanced technologies are being developed that give us the ability to have dispatchable power that can potentially be zero emissions, right? So, as you mentioned, nuclear has no carbon footprint, no zero, it's a zero emissions technology. And then you've also got hydrogen coming to the forefront, which allows for combustion without emissions. So, and I did see an announcement today that out of the DOE focused on nuclear fusion, which I thought was really interesting. Um, so as new technologies get built, I look at it a lot like the days of the internet in the early days, where things didn't quite work right and it wasn't perfect, but over time things got really good. And so as we push for new technologies, don't you see some of those technologies as potentially allowing for dispatchable power that's less causes less pollution to the environment?
Well, let's take hydrogen. It takes about 3 times as many kilowatts to make 1 unit of hydrogen as what you get from it. There was a fellow that worked for Bechtel that wrote an article in Gas Turbine magazine about the basically round trip. You're going to be about 26 or 30% efficient. So if you have an excess of electricity, uh, the net zero carbon people say build a whole bunch of windmills, build a big solar farm, and make green hydrogen. Well, right now, California and Texas can't keep EVs charged during the daytime, let alone have excess power to use it in electrolyzers to make hydrogen. But it's going to take about 3 or 4 megawatts to make 1 megawatt equivalent of hydrogen power in the most advanced gas turbine or fuel cell that's available. So hydrogen, yes, and I think the best source of power for hydrogen, for making hydrogen, is nuclear. So I'm in favor of hydrogen, and if I were to want a vehicle that was powered by something besides gasoline or diesel, I'd want a hydrogen vehicle rather than an electrical vehicle. except you can't buy hydrogen very easily. And when you do, last I checked in Los Angeles, I did a Google check, and I think there was 48 hydrogen refueling stations in California. And there's 150,000 or so gasoline service stations across America. So refueling's a booger. As for advanced fusion, well, when I worked for B&W back in the 60s, they were looking at the breeder reactor, and that looked really, really bright. And it's still a good idea. But the power plants that are providing almost 20% of our total electricity are average age of about 45 or 50 years old. It's fission technology, but it's very proven, very reliable, and they work very well. And I support it. And in fact, my lights and this iPad are being powered by mostly nuclear power right now. So I think it's a good idea. My beef with the future generation is we have not built a clean coal plant since the John Turk plant went in operation in about 2012. And then there was another one in West Virginia that went in around 2013. And the Cliffside 6 at Duke Energy went in around 2013. Okay, we lost the technology. Well, it's still there. We still have the manufacturers, but I have a real good friend that was a senior engineer at Alstom, and he's been retired probably 10 years now. And he told me, he says, Alstom, which is now owned by General Electric, if they got a contract to build a new coal plant, they would not have the engineers to engineer the system. General Electric bought Alstom, and then just basically the people left. They pretty much abandoned the technology. So what I see is a loss of 100. I mean, NERC is the one that said 102,600 megawatts lost in coal and nuclear from 2011. That's in a NERC report last July. I'm not making it up. And in America, we use about 1,100. We have about 1,100 megawatts. Yeah, 1.1 gigawatts of installed power, and nameplate capacity for new generation in solar and wind is okay. The only thing is they run it between 24 and 36% capacity factor. And as we've seen in California and Texas, a lot of times when you need the renewables, they're not running because the wind is calm or it's a cloudy day, or there's snow on the collectors in a winter snowstorm. So I'm for the future, but as far as a natural transition, all they've done in Washington is kill existing plants, like the Zimmer coal plant on the Ohio River. That was originally going to be a nuclear plant in the 90s, and it got abandoned by Cincinnati Gas and Electric. American Electric Power put in a supercritical boiler and a high pressure turbine, and they converted into a very efficient, very clean, supercritical coal plant that ran from 1992 up until May of this year. And the company that bought that from Duke Energy, I think Vistris, shut it down because it was not economical to operate anymore because of the forced wind and solar and the RTO of PJM and MISO. They couldn't compete with the cheap wind and solar that would come on during the day. And so what we have is a death spiral for reliable power plants because renewables are being forced on the grid. The dispatchable power plants, because they're dispatchable, when the cheap power comes on that's subsidized with 25 or so dollars a megawatt comes on, it runs back the coal plants and makes the nuclear plants less economical, and then they're shut down because of economic purposes. And the environmental extremists say, hey, Zimmer wasn't shut down because of us extremists. It was shut down because it was not economical. Well, the reason it's not economical is because of subsidies for wind and solar. And the Palisades nuclear plant in Michigan was shut down for such a reason also. When they really need power in MISO, the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator, and PJM, which is the East Coast running across northeastern United States. But anyway, uh, I'll let you ask another question.
No, I hear you. So I've been watching renewables come on the grid since call it 2005 6. They really took off, and of course there's an argument, and I've listened to Alex Epstein's conversations about how renewables can be parasitic because they depend on dispatchable power. Sure, that's true.
But
So the mistake may have been made in charging the same dollars per megawatt hour for renewables as, say, dispatchable power. But now again, with hydrogen, I think we have an energy storage media. And I think what you're going to see is a lot of wind and solar plants are going to put hydrogen, and they're going to generate hydrogen. For example, you're right that there isn't a total excess need or excess amount of renewables. But what there is a lot of renewables blow at night. For example, wind at night, you don't really need the power. If you can store that and make hydrogen, you've got something, because it's actually an energy storage media that's more advanced. I think where the challenge has been that everybody expected batteries to be a lot further along by now than they are. And so now what you're seeing is people move to hydrogen instead as an energy storage media. And so that makes a lot of sense. You can generate it with wind and solar. You can also generate it with nuclear, as you mentioned. So I like to look for solutions. I do think we have a problem in that CO2 levels are they're causing a warming, or let's say a change in the climate. And besides that, it's just not good to have a lot of emissions. You see what's going on in China, for example, in the cities where people have trouble breathing. So I think, a lot of the environmentalists have made a big positive impact on the planet, say, since the 70s. And if we can continue to go in that direction, as long as we do it smart, we have to do it. We have to do it smart and look at where we are now, and then try and deploy new technologies to make a difference, that will actually give us the result that we're looking for. So that's just my kind of philosophy on it, is to try and take a balanced approach. I think the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. And I think this should be one issue that we ought to be able to get together on, is basically trying to make our environment better for our kids.
I worked for many years doing my very best to make coal plants cleaner and more efficient. And I've got 7 grandchildren, and I love the outdoors. I love feeding the ducks in my backyard. I love nature as much as anyone. However, I like being able to flip the switch and turn my lights on, turn on my iPad. And I live in South Carolina and can't live without air conditioning down here. And I really love it. I'll tell you something that's absurd right here in South Carolina. The utility that serves this area is Santee Cooper, best known as South Carolina Public Service Authority. They started about the same time as TVA in the 30s during the Depression, and they grew like TVA from hydro to coal plants. And then ultimately they bought a third of the Summer Unit 1 nuclear power plant, about 300 and some megawatts. Anyway, they've got about 6,000 megawatt service territory, which includes Hilton Head Island here. And what they're going to do is, and I've participated in their IRP as a stakeholder, but anyway, the legislature and a bunch of do-gooders and worrywarts about the climate have said, you all got to get away from coal. And we want you to shut your coal plants down. So they have apparently agreed to shut down an 1,150 megawatt coal plant, the Winya coal plant, 4 old coal boilers. And yeah, it ought to be replaced with something dispatchable. Well, they're planning on shutting down an 1,150 megawatt reliable, dispatchable, affordable coal plant. And in a few years, the load is projected to be over 6,000 megawatts in this service territory. And there's going to be 1,000 to 1,650 megawatt shortage in power. And so they're trying to replace that with solar, mostly solar around here, and battery. And they just really can't figure out how to do it. But they're still, I think they're going to shut down Winyah. 1,150 megawatts will drop off. And because we're connected to Duke and Southern Company, it'll probably not be a problem. They'll be able to get power, keep the lights on, not like, some other areas. But anyway, as far as batteries go, I have checked, and in America, what really works good for storage is pumped storage hydro. Here in South Carolina, we got Bad Creek, Duke's plant, which was 1,150 megawatts, and I think it's being upgraded to 1,400 megawatts. Well, that's great. And they started that back when they did their first nuclear plants in the 70s. And pump storage hydro is you move water from a lower reservoir to an upper reservoir when there's an abundance of power at nighttime. And during the daytime, you let the water come from the upper reservoir to the lower reservoir, turning the generators as generators. And it's round trip about 80% efficiency. And it's a really good way to go. Well, if you have it doesn't work in Florida. It's not going to work in Nebraska. It works here in South Carolina because we got mountains in the northwest of the state. But across America, according to FERC, we have about 19,000 megawatts, which is great, of pump storage hydro. But it's going to take a lot of batteries to match that. And last I checked on batteries, in California, I think they had about 1,450 megawatts in battery storage. And we're talking hours of storage, maybe 8 hours, maybe 4 hours, maybe 10 minutes. But anyway, pumped storage, water reservoir storage is good for months or years. Hydrogen is good. The only thing is, like I said earlier, it takes 3 or 4 times as much energy to make a unit of hydrogen as what you get from it when you use it on the transmit or the generation side. So my beef, my beef with the energy policy is that we're not building new nuclear plants right now. I got a neighbor that's a retired Navy nuclear guy, and he worked in the commercial nuclear area. And he sent me a paper by the American Nuclear Society, and what they say is, hey, we take all these coal plants and we shut them down, get rid of them, and we'll build small modular reactors. I said, well, great, that's a good idea. Well, there's only one of them planned for right now by NuScale, and it's going to start up, if all goes well, about 2029. That's the only one I know of that's been approved by the NRC. You take the Zimmer coal plant that just shut down in May, 1,350 megawatts of reliable, clean coal power plant right on the Ohio River, right in the heart of the PJM service territory. They shut it down because it wasn't economic. So if you want to replace it with a nuclear unit, small modular reactors, well, you need about 5 or 7 or 10 small modular reactors to replace 1,350 megawatts. I mean, 1,350 megawatts is a major power plant. And the only small modular reactors I know of are 77 to 300 megawatts. And yeah, I'm in favor of them. I think they're a great idea. The United States Navy has done a wonderful job on proving how safe nuclear propulsion can be in submarines and aircraft carriers. So why can't we do that like Rickover and Eisenhower said in 1953 or 55 with the Atoms for Peace initiative? Well, they did. And 20% of our power comes from nuclear fission units now. No problem with replacing those. But My beef is 102,000 megawatts shut down, no new replacements. By nameplate capacity on solar and wind, it's nameplate only capacity. When you really need it, it's not there, and battery storage is not there. The only storage we have long term that's proven and workable is pump storage hydro, and that's great, but it's very capital intensive, and there's limited geographic areas where you can put it.
Gotcha. Well, you mentioned going back a number of years to Eisenhower and back in the day. Tell me about what was America like when you first started in your in your job back in the, was it in the 60s?
You know, I'm one of the luckiest people in the world. I went to a trade school, and I was taught power generation. In 1959, the chief engineer of the power plant program held a pound of coal in his hand, and he said, "Right here, this is worth 12,000 BTUs, and it's worth 778 foot pounds of energy for every one of them BTUs. If you convert the heat energy into mechanical energy at 100% efficiency," and I was hooked. I thought, man, this is cool. And so anyway, I started in the power industry. Later on, went to college, and ultimately became a professional engineer. But I've always worked in the coal power industry, and in the '60s, even as a 16-year-old, and I was not the greatest student in the world. I mean, I was just an average student, average, maybe below, my parents would say, above average. But anyway, I was not the smartest guy. But I knew where the heck electricity came from. I knew it came from coal-fired power plants, and I loved power generation. I got involved in it, and at that time, over 50% of our power was from coal. It went 50% of our energy, our electricity came from coal from my start until the end of my career, actually. Uh, we were 50% up to about 2012. And then the shale gas revolution came on. And what the shale gas revolution did allowed the EPA to ramp up regulations on coal to try to kill coal. They openly wanted to kill coal. Well, they could do it, and there was no pain for the consumers because gas was going down below $2 per million BTU, which was crossing the cost of coal power generation, and they could economically dispatch gas turbines. The other thing that happened around 2012 was gas turbine combined cycles became popular. General Electric, Alstom, Siemens, all of them were able to eke out something over 55% thermal efficiency, energy into, electricity out. And the latest ones are up over 65% thermal efficiency. So the bus bar production cost from gas turbines became competitive or lower than coal. And right there
And
with
it's more dispatchable too, right? It's cheaper,
and
and it was cheaper
absolutely, and
and
it
more
backs up the
dispatchable.
wind turbines and backs up the solar panels very well. And they can build them like cookie cutters, as long as you get it permitted and you have a pipeline to get the gas there. So anyway, the gas went from being, I don't know, 15 or 20% in 2005, 2006 to being 40% now. And there was no pain to consumers. However, fuel is on a gas turbine combined cycle plant is about 90% of the production cost. So if you double the gas cost, you double the production cost. And that's what we're looking at now. As gas prices move from $2, at last I checked, they're about $7 per million BTU. Um, it's a problem.
Well, you just made my point for me on technology, and this, I'm a technology optimist, right? And nobody would have ever thought that the shale revolution was going to happen. Nobody would have ever thought you could get a 65% thermal efficiency out of a gas turbine plant. Nobody would have ever thought that you could 3D print gas turbine parts. So all these technologies that have come to the forefront in the last 20 years, a lot of them nobody saw coming. And I think what we're looking at now is when you mention hydrogen, you were kind of seeing like a Marshall Plan of hydrogen. And what that's going to do is drive costs down. You also saw cost on solar panels plummet and come way, way down to where they were, let's say 20, 30 years ago. I agree that a megawatt hour of dispatchable power should be worth more than a megawatt hour of non-dispatchable power, but the non-dispatchable power as some base load on the grid certainly has some value, right? And so that's why I say I'm a technology optimist, and I'll bet you that in the next 10 years there's going to be technologies that we've never thought of before. I've seen flying car technologies come across my desk, vertical propulsion where you can take a car up straight vertical, like stuff from Back to the Future. When I see it, I can't believe it. And then I talk to the engineers and I'm like, yep, that's going to happen. We're going to see some stuff like we never even imagined over the next 20 years. So that's why I don't think we should be frivolous in our policy, but I also think we should be hopeful and optimistic that when the policymakers mess up, the technologists will be able to figure a way to fix it, basically, by having innovations that nobody could have seen coming. So that's my feeling on that stuff.
Well, one of my favorite authors is Vaclav Smil, and I recommend anybody that's interested in energy. I recommend his books, and he talks in one of his books about Moore's law and technology and how computer chips doubled in computing power every 2 years, and that's wonderful. But I am an optimist also, and I am aware of many good things that can happen in energy. But I've spent so much time in control rooms over the years, and I've been through the no touch situations. I've watched them shut coal conveyors. I've watched them shut the lights off in the power plant to save auxiliary power because the load demand is so delicate that we were saving 100 kW, to put it out on the wires, which I thought was kind of ridiculous, to stop fueling up the silos because we wanted to have more net power generation during that critical time. But anyway, dispatchable power, from my viewpoint, having had those experiences, is very near and dear to my heart. And to see us slashing thousands and thousands of megawatts of coal plants that took 4 years to build, from contract to commercial operation date. We used to do that in 4 years. If you wanted to build 1,000 megawatt power plant now of coal or nuclear, well, Vogtle is 1,100 megawatt, two 1,100 megawatt nuclear units, and they're, I think, into their 10th year. And it hasn't generated the first megawatt yet. I think they'll do it on the first unit next year, but it's 10 years. And it's $30 billion, what should have been a $6 billion power plant. And we tried that here in South Carolina with the Summer 2 and 3. And after spending $9 billion, Santee Cooper and South Carolina Electric and Gas threw in the towel. And when we depend on nameplate capacity of solar and wind, it just doesn't work. The Texans found that out in the winter of 2021. And I don't know whether they're going to make it through this winter. I did a lot of work in Texas at coal plants, and I got to know a lot of Texans, and I love their can-do attitude. But ERCOT is almost an energy island. Of course, it's 65,000 megawatts on peak load. It's a big energy island, but when a big hunk of that gets to be non-dispatchable, it's not good. Let me tell you about, I had an experience with an institution, the Williamson College of the Trades. I was on the board of trustees, and I'm a graduate of Williamson. And we updated the power plant during my days as a trustee. And I was a proponent for solar panels on the sports center. They're 92 kW on a 450 peak load college campus. And we put in a gas turbine and we had cogeneration. So we did heat recovery. We were in the neighborhood of 90% heat recovery when they're running with a steam turbine that exhausts the heat to heat exchangers that pump hot water through the shops and steam to the kitchen. And then we had the solar collectors during the day. And the solar collectors were useful in August because when the students come in, new students come in, it's in Pennsylvania, northern latitude. They don't have a lot of air conditioning. So they run the air conditioning like crazy. And the peak demand we would have would be in August when the new students come in, maybe 450, 500 kilowatts, not megawatts, but kilowatts. And if we could shave off 100 kilowatts, then our demand charge for the rest of the year would be lower, as the way electric companies work. So solar was a good idea because it would teach the students, they would have the experience of putting in solar and the inverters and seeing what it does and do an economical dispatch. And it shaved our peak. So I got no problem with building solar. I got no problem with building wind. I don't even have a problem with tidal. I was on a trip in Canada. Anyway, don't want to digress into that. But anyway, those technologies are great when they work. And for shaving peaks, I think solar and wind and other renewables are excellent. But as we start killing dispatchable, affordable, reliable coal and nuclear plants and forcing wind and solar in their place, we're going to have a day of reckoning like Texas did and like California did with their blackouts. I know it's not all that widespread, and they figured out how to keep Diablo Canyon running for another couple years, and maybe they import power, and Los Angeles Water Power, their most reliable power supply is the 1,800 megawatt coal plant in Utah that sends their power over 1 million volt wires to Los Angeles. Those people in Los Angeles don't have a clue where their power is coming from. But Diablo Canyon and the coal plant in Delta, Utah are very, very important. And of course, they got a lot of gas turbines to back up the solar and wind when that goes down. But I'm in favor of new technology. I'm in favor of hydrogen. I'm in favor of solar, wind, tidal, biomass, cogeneration, all the above. I'm in favor for all of it. But what I hate to see is America given a competitive advantage. China burns 5 times the coal that we do. Xi Jinping has said he is not going to set back their economic progress by shutting coal plants down for any kind of Paris agreement. He's building new coal plants as we speak. Heck, they're building more coal plants this year than a lot of states in America have in total capacity. I mean, the the data is published by the IEA. They don't like to make a big deal about it. The BP statistical data, there's other statistica and other publications show China's coal use is enormous. And they use over 50% of the world's coal. And so for America to say, okay, we're going to go solar, we're going to be good guys, and we're going to do our part to save the climate. So what we're going to do is buy solar panels made in China that are made with coal-fired power plants in China. And we're going to save the climate. All we're doing is transferring our wealth, and we're transferring the supply chain of talent from here to there. And what we are killing is the supply chain for research and development for new technologies, because most of the R&D that's productive in America is provided by manufacturing. And whether it's steel manufacturing or whether it's General Electric in power production or whatever, they fund their R&D. My little company, we used to use an IRS tax credit for spending money on research for new technologies for generating power more efficiently. Maybe just on a small scale, what we did, but anyway, if you lose the manufacturing, you lose the revenue stream of which you can take and spin off for research and development and funding colleges. And so I see us doing stupid policies where we think we're doing the right thing by making a major switch to green power, and the best beneficiaries of that is going to be Xi Jinping, China, the Communist Party, and Putin. And I see that as absurd.
There's certainly an argument there when you're trying to reduce CO2 globally. If large countries are not participating to the degree they could, it definitely has an impact. I would say one of the reasons why we've transitioned so quickly from coal and been able to, I go back to the fracking that you mentioned and the gas revolution. So a lot of people don't realize we have one of the world's most advanced fracking technologies, as well as gas pipeline infrastructure, as well as gas supply. So that's an example of, I think, why we've been able to transition from coal. And the other thing I would say is the gas fired generation is very dispatchable, and it's going to be important. You mentioned coal and nuclear being dispatchable to a degree, but it's very difficult to cycle those plants up and down as needed. So they're not as flexible as gas generation. And I think if we can get to a point where we're burning a significant amount of uh, the combustion in a gas turbine, if a big chunk of that comes from hydrogen, I saw that GE's latest combustion system can handle 50% hydrogen. Right there, you're reducing your bad emissions by half, um, and it's already significantly below a coal-fired plant just by the nature of gas combustion compared to coal combustion. So I I, I agree with you that on your comments about other countries not fully participating in the Paris Accord, but I also think that we do have a significant technology advantage um, in a lot of different ways over the other countries in terms of what we've been able to develop. And the same thing that happened in Silicon Valley, where we led the world, is now happening in energy. And you're seeing a lot of really bright engineers from the computer world move over to the energy world. So I'm extremely hopeful for that in terms of allowing the US to lead the way in this revolution, which I think is the revolution of the next 30 years, whereas the computing revolution was of the last 30 years. So it's for me, it's really exciting to see that.
Well, the the
Different
killing,
perspectives, right?
yeah, a lot of this stuff is wished for. We wish we had clean power. We wish we had magic. I wish I could just take a rock and have two wires come out of it. And but getting
I'm
back to
kind of a
hydrogen.
Steve. I'm kind of a Steve Jobs kind of a thinker, right? Is
Well, I think it's
sometimes
good
the
to think.
people who think they change the world, they might. Sometimes the people who think they can change the world are the ones who do.
Well, I'm sure y'all will change the world, but I'm a troubleshooting guy, and I remember things like hydrogen embrittlement. And I remember working for Babcock and Wilcox in the nuclear and special products division, and we sold an ISOMAX reactor vessel to an oil company. And the oil company did not tell B&W what it was used for because it was a secret process. Well, the secret process was they used live hydrogen under 5,000 psi pressure to reform gasoline to make high octane gasoline. And part of the things they did to in thermophoric catalytic crackers to make more than 50% gasoline from a barrel of crude. And anyway, after a couple years, the thing developed a crack. And they contacted B&W and they said, you know, you sold us a bad piece of metal here. And B&W said, well, you didn't tell us you were using hydrogen. And you do not use hydrogen in high carbon steel pressure vessels because you get into a case where the hydrogen molecules are so small, they get between the molecules of steel and carbon and form cracks, and that's called hydrogen embrittlement. So if we use more than about 5% hydrogen into the existing pipelines across America, and you've seen the maps of how many thousands of miles of pipelines there are that environmentalists don't like to admit that they're there and they've been safe. Um, you may get into hydrogen embrittlement kind of fractures. So I'm in favor of hydrogen. I'm in favor of new technologies. But the big problem I have for energy policy in America is there is no thinking way of making that transition. All they're doing is shutting down the existing coal plants and unwittingly shutting down, like Indian Point in New York. They shut down because of politically, and then they talk about, you know, I think the mayor of New York talked about some solar power going to schools a couple weeks ago. What a great thing! Well, they had 1,100 megawatts worth of nuclear power plants that they just shut down just because they didn't like it. And it was very reliable. The same for Michigan with Palisades, and then you go up into Vermont and Pilgrim in Massachusetts. They've shut down some really reliable nuclear plants, and we've not come up with replacements. I mean, uh, fusion energy, energy storage with batteries, new techniques, new processes for making hydrogen more efficiently. Well, yeah, they're all good. But comes January 15th or 20th of 2023, when we get a cold snap coming through and people turn on their heat pumps or turn on their furnaces and can't get what they need, that's a problem. We're just forcing America to end up in a situation like the poor folks in Ukraine are ended up with the Russians, you know, taking out their power plants. I mean, our problems are self-inflicted with stupid policies, and I find that's why I say I'm an energy advocate and I'm not part of Storm Technologies when I say that, because I sincerely believe our energy policies could not be run any better if Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping were pulling the strings. They are absolutely anti-American.
Well, so we're getting towards time here. I'd like to ask you, if you could give me one hopeful thing, one thing that you think gives us hope for the future.
Well, I think energy efficiency is improving. The hydrogen revolution, I think, is going to happen. I'm privy to some new processes that are working to make hydrogen more efficiently. I think that'll come to be. One of my sons has a Tesla. I've ridden in it. You know, the automatic driving feature, the 1,000 horsepower 0 to 60 in 1.9 seconds. Hey, that's all cool.
That's
But
unbelievable, right? I mean,
it,
when I got in one for the first time, you can't believe the acceleration. It's
and no
unbelievable, and
no tire
I'll
spin.
say that that's an example of one man, and of course building out teams. But Elon was able to do Tesla, Solar City, SpaceX, and now he's on in social media as well. And I think those kind of people, it doesn't take many of them to have a huge game changing impact for the rest of us.
And I watched an interview on Elon Musk last night, and that guy's phenomenal. Self-made rocket scientist, and I read the book Liftoff about their tough drive to you know, try 3 times and fail 3 times and the fourth rocket made it into orbit, and then they got the contract from NASA. But I mean, that's amazing hopefulness for the future. And Elon Musk is my superhero. I think he's doing a wonderful job. And I saw, interestingly, somebody sent me a YouTube of the hydrogen powered Tesla that he plans for 2030. And it's fantastic. And he's talking, similar performance as the Model S EV. And I'm thinking, well, Elon's thinking like me. The EVs where you got to plan a 500-mile trip around charging stations and checking your emails after the first 300 miles so you can get a 20-minute 80% charge to do the next 300 miles. You can live with that kind of stuff, but being able to refuel with hydrogen is better in 5 minutes. But anyway, I think hydrogen, energy efficiency, and clean energy are all things we can be hopeful for in the future. The transition right now, I think, is very, very poorly treated, but there's good things on the horizon.
No, I agree, Dick. So on that note, we agree, and it's been a pleasure having you on. This is Dick Storm. He's an energy policy advocate, and he brought a very unique perspective to energy superheroes. And we appreciate your time. Thank you, Dick.
Thank you, Peter. It's been a pleasure working with you, and thank you for persisting with my technology problems with my iPad. But thank
My
you very
pleasure.
much.